Hello, my name is Kenley Frederick, and I am in VPA 2303, Group 5, with my co-members Jake Hemley, Cody Gustafson, Janelle Taylor, and Shane Allen. Today, our group will be presenting a lecture over the African American impact on art throughout different decades in America, from the 1960s to the 2000s. One of the major signs of growth in America is the evolution of how African Americans are portrayed and included in pop culture. From the 1960s to the 2000s, we can analyze popular art and trends to better understand 1. How African Americans were being included or unincluded in that decade, and 2. How our country has grown in equality throughout each decade. We will be covering various topics throughout the lecture, such as Afrofuturism, the importance behind the chaos and potency of African American portrayal in art, and how equality in art has developed over time. But before we can talk about how it gets better, we need to understand what it was like before. To preface the large amount of change that happened from the 1960s to the 2000s, we can look at characters like Aunt Jemima, who was made to look like a female slave that worked in the home, or a mammy. We can see this featured in the photo on the right, which showcases the classic slave worker's bonnet and plain clothing. The syrup superstar is a prime example of African Americans consistently being portrayed in pop culture as lesser than, even after they were granted freedom and citizenship. The overbearing thumb that the media put on African Americans when it came to their portrayal in art gave off the feeling that freed doesn't mean free. If you look at the photo on the right, you'll see one of the many civil rights protests. Starting with the civil rights movement in the 1960s, we see a major change in how African Americans were portrayed, especially in pop culture. Soul music made more of an appearance, and African American poets made quite a bit of ground during this time. For example, a poet named Amiri Baraka. Amiri Baraka made quite a few speeches and pieces of poetry that he spoke at civil rights protests, and he fueled a lot of people's fire for change. Baraka is also one of the many African American artists that the civil rights movement granted a lot more control over their image. Previous to this, it was extremely common for African Americans to either have to sell their work to a white artist just to have it accepted by the public, or have their work remain unseen due to the color of their skin. Going back to the up-and-coming presence of soul music brings us to the Queen of Soul herself, Miss Aretha Franklin. We see a picture of her absolutely glowing on the left side. Most popular for her song Respect, Aretha Franklin became one of the most famous African American singers of all time. Her audience featured a wide range of backgrounds and ages that gave hope to many African Americans that they too could achieve their dreams. Another way that we see a major change in the portrayal of African Americans is through the movie Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. This film was the very first to ever feature a mixed-race couple, and it also portrayed a black man in a role that was not a slave or hired help, which we see in the photo on the right with a black man in formal clothing and a white woman on his arm. This was extremely forward for the decade, as mixed couples were highly rare and somewhat frowned upon by the status quo at this time. We obviously see the importance of this film being produced because it showed African Americans in an equal light for the first time. Next up, we have the 1970s, which will be presented by Jake Hemley.